¿Confianza en él?
Mire, yo confío plenamente en la justicia chilena como patriota y luchador antimarxista y juntista por sobre todas las cosas.
Despite his confidence, Townley was extradited to the US and convicted of Letelier's murder. Pinochet ruled Chile as a military dictator for 17 years, but in a frank interview, Harberger remained in denial.
You cannot have a repressive government for long within a genuinely free economic system.
In the same year as Orlando Letelier's murder, Milton Friedman was awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics.
You people have such a distorted idea of what went on. Let me tell you some facts. Number one, I was offered 2 honorary degrees by universities in Chile before I went down. I refused to take them because those universities were being supported in part by public funds, and I did not want to appear in any way to provide any support to the political system in Chile. I'm not a representative of Chile. I'm not an advisor to Chile. I have no commitments to the government of Chile.
I now turn to you, Professor Milton Friedman. I am very sorry for this incident. It could have been worse.
What I'm trying to do in the shock doctrine is tell an alternative history of how this savage stream of pure capitalism that we've been living, capitalism unrestrained, came to dominate the world.
Chile wasn't the only country in South America to adopt Chicago school policies. Friedman's disciples held key positions in Brazil and advised the government of Uruguay. Then on March the 24th, 1976, a military coup overturned the government of Isabel Perón in Argentina. A junta of 3 generals took over the country, led by General Videla. Chicago boys landed key economic posts in the military government. They seized the opportunity for major economic and social re-engineering. And within a year of the coup, wages lost 40% of their value, factories closed, poverty spiraled. Just as in Chile, people had to be terrorized into accepting these economic policies. Videla learnt from Pinochet's experience. He adopted the tactic of disappearing people. Striking a balance between public and private horror, disappearances were often carried out in broad daylight, but could always be denied. Many of the techniques used by the Chilean and Argentinian military had been learnt in the US-run School of the Americas.
Torture techniques taught, from rape to derobing to torture with pointed objects, breaking of extremities, poking eyes out, branding.
In Latin America, there are various regimes which at the moment are abusing human rights. Political murder, torture, deportations, imprisonment without trial, using the techniques they may have learned in this establishment.
You may be right. If you can say that the skills which we've taught here have been applied, I can't deny that.
The use of torture of a known enemy soldier to gain some kind of military advantage, I think, is justifiable and smart. To go beyond that, to use torture techniques merely to intimidate people is completely wrong, unethical and immoral.
But in Argentina and Chile, these techniques were not used just on soldiers or terrorists. They were used on students and union members. They were used on anyone who opposed the free market economic policies of the regime. In 1978, the Argentine junta hosted the World Cup. The final was played in the stadium less than a mile away from the biggest detention camp in the country, where thousands of prisoners were held in torture chambers.
Decir que con los goles, con el grito de gol, se tapaba la voz de los secuestrados, los gritos de los secuestrados era una realidad.
Organización extraordinaria, miles y miles de banderas, miles y miles de gargantas embronquecidas, 25 millones de argentinos que tienen un solo color, el celeste y blanco. El fútbol ha hecho el milagro del país, de este maíz maravilloso que nos siguen atacando a aquellos que...
And Argentina took their terror regime one step further than Chile. Among the disappeared were hundreds of pregnant women. Women who were allowed to give birth before being murdered.
De todas aquellas mujeres que estaban embarazadas, les permitieron tener a sus hijos para una vez que nacieran sacárselos. Y eso sucedió con 500. Yo soy uno de esos 500.
Those children, many of whom were raised by families connected to the military, were a powerful reminder of the junta's project to re-engineer an entire society. While the junta was still in power, a group of mothers and grandmothers of the disappeared started to protest in the Plaza de Mayo. They turned detective, searching for the disappeared children. After the junta collapsed, some were found and reunited with their families. Occasionally they found remains. Mostly they found nothing. General Videla was found guilty of murder, kidnapping and torture. He was sentenced to life in prison.
Early experiments in Latin America presented Friedman and his cohorts with a serious ideological problem. Friedman had promised that these policies would not just make the elites richer, but that they would create the freest possible societies, that this was a war against tyranny, that capitalism and freedom went hand in hand. Yet here we see that in the 70s, the only countries putting these ideas into practice were military dictatorships. Nixon had fully supported imposing these types of brutal free market policies in South American dictatorships. But when it came to domestic economic policy in the United States, where Nixon had to worry about getting re-elected, it was a very, very different story.
Friedman enjoyed a friendly relationship with Nixon. Several of his Chicago school colleagues and disciples were recruited to work for the government. Donald Rumsfeld was one of them.
So help me God. Congratulations. Thank you.
But in 1971, with the economy in a slump, Nixon turned his back on Friedman's ideas and imposed a wage and price control policy. He put Rumsfeld in charge.
Which is essentially a problem of supply and demand.
I have for long been opposed to the wage and price control. I believe it involves government intervention with the freedom of individuals. I think it's intolerable.
The Keynesian policy was a success, and Nixon won a second term with a landslide majority. It was a blow for Friedman. Then in 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected Prime Minister of Britain. Her intellectual guru was Milton Friedman's old mentor, Friedrich von Hayek. And just over a year later, Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States.